Hi, everyone. You didn't take a 16-hour flight. You should be awake. Hi, everyone. Thank you. That's better. Thank you. I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here with you. I've been following the Summer Institute. I was involved in organizing one in Chicago that Suvayan was involved in, and before that as well. And it is truly a thrill to see that what started out in many ways as not entirely true, but largely influenced by an article that several of us wrote in 2009 in Science that had a very simple title called Computational Social Science. And that article in 2009 has helped generate a lot of interest over the years, over the decades. We did a follow-up article also in Science in 2020 or 2021, I can't remember now, looking at the challenges and obstacles that we had faced in computational social science. And I'm especially thrilled to see that the Summer Institutes are now spread all over the world. We have one in Chicago as well. But I came all the way to Singapore because I was invited by you folks to come out here. And so I want to thank you again. I want to thank Alice Renwen, I don't know which one you prefer to go by, and Suvayan and all the other organizers for giving me a chance to be here and talk about this. Believe it or not, that even though I've been in Singapore many times, and including for an ICA conference that was held here a few years ago, quite a few years ago, actually, and also given talks at NTU and at SMU, I have actually never been at National University of Singapore before. And the irony is that when I got my undergraduate degree in India, in electrical engineering, not connected to social sciences, from a school there called the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras, IIT in Madras. And when I was there, the first institution that I heard of outside of in Singapore was actually not NTU, and SMU did not even exist at the time. It was the National University of Singapore. And the reason I heard about it was because one of my mentors, where's the cursor? Why do I not see the cursor? Okay, whoever is there, just click on that little, I put a sneaky, no, go back. Click on this. There we go. Click on this thing. See this guy. This guy, Professor V. Anantharaman, was a professor at IIT Madras. He taught me my first class on management when I was a student there between 1978 and 1983. And it was a big deal that in 1981, 82, he left IIT Madras because he was recruited by National University of Singapore. And we all hated National University of Singapore. It was feeling one of the best professors that we had at IIT Madras at the time. Since then, he's been here and he passed away in 2015 at the age of 87. But he spent quite a few years here at National University of Singapore. So that's how I first heard about it. The moral of the story is keep in mind, mentors are very important, play a very important role. And here I am all these years later on, in large part because I was inspired by him 40 years ago. In 1984, I took a class with him on management while I was an engineering undergraduate student. Okay, thank you. So I'm especially, one thing I will say as part of the welcoming, I heard all of your introductions, and I absolutely am impressed by all the different things you're doing. I can tell you the future of the field of computational social science is obviously very, very healthy and robust, given the energy that I see in this room. The energy that I see in this room coming 16 women and 3 men. That adds extra energy and encouragement to what I see as the future of computational social science. That's fantastic. I will say that when I was introduced to that, I was a past president of ICA. And until now, when I think about ICA, I always think about pretty good thoughts. It's been my home association throughout my, I went to my first ICA as a PhD student at the USC, from the Annenberg School at USC, not the one that Suvayan went to, the other Annenberg School at USC. But on this trip, I suddenly realized that I was even more impressed by another ICA. The immigration. The immigration. Oh my goodness, how fast it is. It is the fastest. I would not be here right now if it wasn't for how good ICA Singapore is in terms of getting me through. By the time I got off the plane, got into the Grab car that I was able to book on the app, was about 9 minutes, which is unbelievable compared to for a big airport like Singapore. And so now when I think of ICA, I'm going to think of warm thoughts, not only about the field of communication, but also about the immigration at the airport. Okay, so I was originally going to talk specifically about, only about looking at it in the workplace, networks in the workplace, because that's some of the areas that I focused on. I should say that when I started in grad school, I took my first class in social network analysis as a PhD student in 1984, 85, from a professor who has passed away since then. His name is Professor Everett Rogers, another huge mentor of mine. Ev Rogers taught us a class on social network analysis. There were 6 of us who sat around the table at USC Allenwood School. And he started the lecture by saying, I just want to give you a caution. I want to warn you. We all looked at him like, uh-oh, what is this? And he says, I'm going to talk to you about a new way of looking at the world, which is like a virus. Once you're infected with the virus, you will never be able to get rid of that virus. And the virus is to think of the world from a network science point of view. In other words, you will look at everything as a network. You look at problems as a network. You look at solutions as a network. And he was right. He infected me with that virus. And starting in 1987, when I started as an assistant professor at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign for 20 years, and now 17 years at Northwestern, I spent my entire career trying to infect as many people as I can with the virus of network science. Of course, network science got a huge lead when computational social science allowed us to look at much larger networks than we did. When I started network science, a big network data set would be about 200 nodes. I don't need to tell you now why that is so outdated. But I just want you to be warned. Advanced caution. You, my friends, are the latest potential victims of my ability to try to convince you and infect you with the virus of network science. Okay? Are you all ready for it? If you don't want it, make sure you put your network science mask on so that you don't get infected with it. But I think it's a good virus to have. And it has certainly been something that has been very fulfilling to me personally. I want to focus today, given all the interests that you have, on a much broader talk than I was originally going to give. I'm going to focus on talking about computational social science, how we can think about it not just as an academic field to help us get good published papers, to help us be able to make tenure and get good jobs and all of the kind of stuff that all of you are potentially going to be doing if you go into academia, or even if you go to do research in industry. But I think that the bigger issue that I want each of you to be motivated by is, why are we doing computational social science research? What are the grand societal challenges that we are addressing as we do this? Because at the end of the day, today more than ever, social science is being challenged with the opportunity, but also the obligation to actually make a difference in the world. I spend a lot of my time at Northwestern in the Department of Industrial Engineering and Management Sciences. Anyone heard of Industrial Engineering and Management Sciences? It's like an engineering, but not like a mechanical or a civil engineering. It's about processes, it's about human-machine interactions and so on and so forth. And my engineering friends will constantly look at me and go, you got an undergraduate degree in engineering. Yeah, I did. They go, what is it, social sciences? All they do is describe and explain. They don't talk about how we can actually intervene. How can we make a difference? How can you engineer systems? In fact, the one phrase, social engineering, has gotten a negative connotations in many circles. So we need to reappropriate that word and not necessarily think that so about engineering systems and making a difference is necessarily a bad thing. So I want you to think about all the work you're doing, which all sounds really exciting. Think about answering the so what question. I've done my work, so what? How can I make a difference? What is it that it can do? How can I convince policymakers that what I do is actually going to be something that is, quote unquote, at least in the US, actionable? But the phrase actionable, make something happen as a result of what I'm doing. Today, it's not always the case. Of course, some of you may want to do this, and I don't want to disrespect those who do.
But it's not always the case that we can be, as a field, computational social science can say, oh, all we want to do is improve our understanding. We have to understand, we have to enable, we have to intervene, we have to make changes. That's how we are going to stay relevant. That's how we're going to be considered as valuable to society. So I'm going to focus on 4 of these societal changes only because these happen to be 4 of some of the changes that I and my lab has been working. I should really say my lab and I have been working on, because my lab does all the hard work. I get to fly on planes and come here and talk to you about it, but the hard work is actually done by the students in the lab. And some of them, as you will see, have done very well for themselves, and I'm very proud of it. One of the things that I want to mention before, speaking of networks, one of the things I want to mention that is not directly connected to the talk is, think very hard about what you are doing here as a group. It's nice that you have good speakers coming in to talk to you. Okay, I know that my colleague Ying Dan Liu is going to be here to talk to you soon about this in the talk, and there are lots of good speakers. I've looked at the list, it's really impressive. My suggestion to you is that in 5 years from now, if you look back at SICSS-24 in Singapore, the most valuable memory and the most valuable takeaway that you will have from the Summer Institute is not any of the talks that you hear. It's the network that you build amongst yourselves. You are forming a cohort of individuals. You are getting to know one another. You're going to see each other in the field for the next 20, 30 years, if not more. I can tell you that when I was a grad student, when I met individuals at doctoral consortia, we didn't have Summer Institute, but we had doctoral consortia and so on. Those networks that we built, who knew? Most of those people who I knew in those networks are former presidents, fellows of ICA, editors of big journals, and done all kinds of great things. And we all look at each other like, I remember you as a grad student. Who knew that you were going to be doing all these great things in 20, 30 years? You are going to be doing these great things and have all this title in 20, 30 years. So just take the opportunity of being in the Summer Institute, get to know one another, learn about what each of you is doing, build the bonds. That's going to be, in 5 years from now and beyond, perhaps arguably the most valuable takeaway from the Summer Institute. Okay, so hear that from somebody who has gray hair, who's saying, what I'm saying is not that important. Your connections amongst yourselves is really going to be what's important in 5 years and beyond. Okay, so what are the challenges? Accelerating innovation. So accelerating innovation is a big challenge in society because, as you know, we are constantly getting to be more and more competitive in all walks of life. In any walk of life, we are going to have to do better. And in every aspect of life, we have to look at innovation. We think we have seen a lot of innovations over the last century. And that is true. Gen AI probably is the most recent example of one of those innovations that today, at least, everyone is going to be talking about and actually has spoken about, even as part of your introductions, many of you mentioned. But staying competitive is not something that we can take for granted. What's the name of this? Yeah. And then what's the name of the building? I wonder why. Right? Right? That's what I'm trying to get at. This innovation is so important in today's contemporary society. The second one I'm going to talk about is scaling up of global health solutions. Many of you mentioned that you're interested in health, right? Show of hands, who all said interested in health? A few of you said you were interested. These are all important issues, and we'll talk some more about that. Renwen mentioned that I'm also doing work in space travel. And I'm going to guess that many of you may think, like, what is he talking about? No one has gone into that. Well, but we just heard yesterday in the news, right? You read in the news about the Changi rocket that landed on the dark side of the moon. So space travel is here, okay? And we are preparing for a mission to Mars, even though it was kind of ironic that in the very same day that China had this huge success of landing something on the moon, Boeing and NASA had the huge embarrassment of, for the nth time, failing to launch a Boeing mission to the International Space Station. But that's a separate story. But we are going to Mars, and we have to prepare for that. That's a societal challenge that we face. And the last one I'm going to talk about is one, again, that we've talked about, and that is how do we think about how AI is going to be embedded at work? How do we think about human AI systems? I know some of you mentioned human AI in the context of health, in the context of medicine. In any field, human AI at work is a huge challenge that we face. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the work we've done in that area. 4 areas, we're going to rush through these. Before going into that in detail, I'm going to start with giving you the problem in each of them, and then I'll come back to the solutions. Ready? So, how many of you recognize this picture? Anyone recognize this picture? Yes, so I am. Tell us about this one. It's a game.
Yeah, Jeopardy,
The Jeopardy, you can sit down. You want to answer? Oh, you want to throw your voice? It's a game on television. Anyone heard of this game on television? You've heard of it? Jeopardy? Kind of heard of it? It's a quiz show that was very popular on American television. And they would always have a way of trying to do the general knowledge test. One day, IBM decided that they had been working on this AI platform called Watson. And they decided that their platform was so good that they can compete on this television quiz contest and do better than humans. And so this, what you see here is a screenshot of 2 of the absolute champions, human champions of general knowledge. And in the middle is the computer, IBM Watson. And IBM Watson had been built, this was many years ago. IBM Watson had been built, this was in 2011, 13 years ago. They had sucked all the information from the web, and the system was able to answer questions in real time. And of course, the reason I'm talking about it is, guess what? Who won this? Watson. They totally decimated the humans. They decimated. It was a big shock to everyone. We have a computer that has better general knowledge than a human. Amazing technology at the time. Today, it's, we're talking 13 years later. This was in 2011. But the person who came up with this was a guy by the name of David Ferrucci. David was the director of the IBM Watson program at IBM Watson. He was the mastermind behind it. He's no longer at IBM. He's now building secret, similar kinds of systems for a hedge fund called Bridgewater Associates. He's done pretty well for himself. But at the time, he was at IBM. David is a friend of ours at Northwestern. He's affiliated with Kellogg, so I spent a lot of time talking with him. And I asked him a bunch of questions about it, which is obviously in awe because he clearly knows a lot about these issues. But I was especially interested in this article that he wrote in the New York Times, where he says, the technology of Watson is really, really tough, but it was not the biggest problem I had. The biggest problem I had was building the team that built Watson. Building the team that built Watson. And I asked him, I said, why? And he goes, well, first of all, when I was asked to do this by IBM, I then tried to find the really smartest people that I could work with. And I would approach someone and they said, sorry, I've got 20 other projects because I'm smart. I have a lot of other projects already. I have no spare time. So I don't have time for you. We try to convince them, your papers can wait. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We can make history. And they go, no, get out of here. And one of them said to him, you know what? Let me give you some advice. You shouldn't be doing this either. You're going to fail and it's going to kill your career. So he was not happy. He kept trying. He finally convinced one really smart person, give ourselves at least, give it 4 hours a week. You can do all your other research, just give me 4 hours a week. And he was very happy. He got this really, really well-known scholar. And then he went to the next scholar and he says, I want you to join the team. And this other scholar, this other scientist, I should say, at IBM Research Labs, said, oh, this sounds interesting. Do you have anyone on your team? And he said, yes, I have that person X, the famous X, has agreed to join our team. And you know what the second person said? Oh, X, he's a jerk. I don't want to be part of that team. Sometimes you have competent jerks. Life is too short. So he had a lot of difficulty finding people to put on the team. And his situation, while extreme in this case, is something we all face. Ask ourselves all the time, in different facets of our life, whether it's for a classroom project, a research project, a teaching project, whatever it is that we are doing, how do we build the team? How do we choose the people we choose in a team? And what are the consequences of who we choose? Okay. And that has a really important role because if you want to have innovation, in today's world, innovation is primarily done by teams. It's not done by individuals. People go back. There's a very famous biographer in the United States by the name of Walter Isaacson. Anyone heard of Walter Isaacson? Heard of him? Walter Isaacson is a very, very well-known author. He's written all kinds of biographies. He wrote one on Stephen C. Jobs. He wrote one about Edison. He's written up lots of these. And he finally wrote a book called The Innovators, where he said, you know, I've written all these biographies and it makes it look like these individuals are superheroes. But when you go back and look at it, all the individuals that I've written biographies of would not have been able to do what they did if it wasn't for the team around. So he was actually backtracking. He said, I'm going to compare all the people I've written to you about. I'm going to look at what they did. I'm going to compare them with other people who existed at the same time as them, but didn't have a good team around them. And the reason that the people who we now know as famous people, even though we think of them as solo heroes like Steve Jobs and Edison, really the credit goes to the team. So he's making the argument that even in history, no one has really been an individual innovator. Most of the people that we think of as individual innovators had a team around. And certainly that is true today, even if it wasn't true in the past. So we'll come back and see how network science and computational social science can help us understand how to make those teams more innovative. Okay? The second one I want to focus on is scaling up global health solutions. Here we have a very simple problem. The problem is, for example, there are certain challenges that are faced around the world. Neonatal mortality is one of those challenges. What is neonatal mortality? The likelihood that a child dies at birth. And the number of children who die close to birth is enormous, especially in the global south, especially in developing. This is an incredibly challenging problem. Look at this. Most of these deaths are due to events that occur during or shortly after delivery. Death rates in India have fallen, but they're still 10 times greater than in high income countries. 10 times greater. Now, the good news is we have ways of solving this problem. Because of funding from the kinds of agencies that you see at USAID, CHIP, the Gates Foundation, all of these have made it possible that we know how to solve the problem. For example, in this case, if we put this solution, topical solution called chlorhexidine, on the umbilical cord of a child right after they are born, the research shows that the likelihood that they will be able to, the likelihood that they will be able to survive goes up by 50%. All it takes is putting this chlorhexidine on the umbilical cord of the child. So the healthcare worker is told, when the child is born, just put chlorhexidine solution on the umbilical cord, the child is born. Sounds simple, problem solved. Not really. Because it turns out that even though we have a simple, cheap solution, very inexpensive, shown through clinical trials to be very effective, no one is using it. Very few people are using it. Well, why, you ask? How interesting. That's exactly what we're going to talk about next. I'll give you another problem. It's not just neonatal mortality, also connected with birth is fertility rates. If you look at this, you'll see that overall the fertility rate has declined from 3.2 to 2.15. The population in some parts of the developed world, including, I might add, in the last few years, China. Right? China had a one-child policy. Some of you may be familiar with that. And now what are they trying to do? They incentivize you to have more kids. Not less, but more kids, right? Because everything is, the population is shrinking there. And China's not alone. A lot of the developing economy is doing it, but not some of the countries that are still in the global south. If you look at it in sub-Saharan Africa, the region with the highest fertility, it's still as high as 4.6. There's a lot of children being born, and population continues to increase dramatically in some parts of the world. Okay. So the question that you might ask again is why? Because we do have modern contraceptive methods that are able to deal with these issues. Inexpensive. There's no supply problem, because a lot of people say, oh, we may have it, but maybe they don't have supply in sub-Saharan Africa. Not a problem. Anyone can get modern contraceptives in sub-Saharan Africa if they want to. The problem is not a supply problem. The problem is no one wants to use it. Why do they not want to use it? Well, we'll talk more later on. But at the start of it, you'll see things like, well, my religious leader told me not to use it. My in-laws told me not to use it. Some people told me that it's going to affect my health, even though there are all these studies that show that it's perfectly healthy. My partner says not to use it because if I use it, it means I'm cheating on him or her by using it. Right? So you have all these reasons. So both of these have something in common, whether it is chlorhexidine, whether it's modern contraceptive. What they have in common is that we have the solution, but people are not using it. Right? And so this is what basically came up with the idea that even though we have it, it's still not being used. So this problem is called as the scaling up problem. The scaling up problem means how do you take something that we know works in pilot tests and make sure that an entire society adopts it, right? That's what we call the scaling up problem. So we have a lot of contraception methods, but this was a quote from an article that Melinda Gates talked about. She was one of the first people who realized that we've spent all this money through at the time, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'm not sure whether you heard, but just within the last 2 weeks, Melinda decided to drop out of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But what she realized was that they had spent all this money coming up with global health solutions. The problem was no one was using it because it was not scaling up. It existed, but it was not being scaled up. She called that the scaling up problem, and she realized that networks was the way of helping with it, which is why a lot of my research was funded through that process, including the work that Renwin was mentioning was also funded through the Gates Foundation. And so part of it is how do we think about different ways of how social networks and norms affect the adoption of modern contraceptives? Who are the key people to promote family planning? How can we economically map social networks in this particular context? The third societal challenge I'm going to talk to you about is mission to Mars. As I said, we are about to become an interplanetary species. We're going to be in a situation where we're going to go to Mars in the next 2 decades. And going to Mars is not a trivial issue because if you think of the International Space Station, you're all familiar with the International Space Station? It's going around the Earth. It's not very far from here. It's only 250 miles above the Earth. Right? Only 250 miles of it's not very far. 250 miles is between Champaign and Champaign-Urbana and Chicago is a little around that much, a little more than that. That's not very far. And there's a second satellite out in space, the Chinese space station, which is also in about the same orbit as the International Space Station. The moon, it's a little further. It's 250,000 miles above the Earth. Right? So it's a little difficult to get there. And even the satellite from China, Chang'e, that was there, that went there, had to orbit the moon several times, almost for a month. They orbited the moon before they could find the right landing place, which they did yesterday. A lot of challenges. Oh, but then there is Mars, which is 250 million miles from not 250, not 250,000, 250 million miles. So what happens when you decide to go to the moon? Well, it's going to take you a long time to get there, even with the best rocket propulsion that you have today. It's going to take at least 4, 5, 8, almost a year to get there. And then if you look at this, you'll see that if you don't want to send a rocket from Earth to Mars at a time when they are on opposite sides of the sun. So you want to see when they are close so that they can pop right over to Mars, right? So there's only a narrow window in the orbital space when you launch something from Earth to go to Mars. And then you have to wait on Mars again for a year until that window opens so that you can send it back to Earth. So overall, we're talking about a mission that is going to take up to 3 years. And these are the dates on which you can actually launch. You can see the window is very narrow. And so it's going to take about 3 years, almost a year to get to Mars. You stay there for a year to wait till the orbits line up, and then a year to come back. And as you get closer to Mars, or if you get to Mars, because of the speed of light limitations, it's going to take you as much as 22 minutes for a message from Earth to get to Mars. Some of you may have seen the movie Apollo 13, where the astronauts said, Houston, we have a problem. And the idea was that Apollo 13 had a problem and they could just tell Houston, about it in mission control and they heard it immediately. When you go to Mars, the astronauts can't say, Houston, we have a problem, and expect to hear back for 45 minutes. There's 22 minutes to get there, even if they immediately responded or take that. What that means is that the autonomy is very important, that as we think of missions to Mars, we can't rely on the Earth controlling them. They have to make their own decisions. They have to do everything on their own, which means that they have to rechange how we think about space travel. As a result, NASA has now realized that up until now, they saw two big human challenges of traveling in space. The first one was loss of gravity. When you go to the International Space Station, you see people floating around, those astronauts floating around at the space station, right? That can affect the body. It affects various things about the bones, it affects the eyes, it affects our muscles, because you don't have to work hard to travel. That means you have to do special exercises to keep your muscle in space so that when you come back to Earth, you're not going to be completely disabled, right? The second challenge that we face right now is that as soon as we leave the orbit of the Earth, we leave the Van Allen radiation belt, which means that now we are open to radiation, cosmic radiation, which is one of the things that happens even on the space station. Especially beyond that, you have to be concerned that there is radiation happening in intergalactic space that you need to be concerned about. It can give us cancer. It's like X-rays, strong X-rays being exposed to it 24/7. The third hazard, which they had not considered until now, is the one that you see up here. And that is that when you get to planetary work, that is, you're going into space, all the way to Mars, not just to Moon, not low Earth orbit, not even lunar visit. As soon as you get to planetary habitation, 3 years, then the huge factor that becomes important is the risk of performance and behavioral health due to inadequate cooperation, coordination, communication, and psychosocial adaptation within a team. Teamwork now becomes a huge risk factor at NASA, even though it has never been that way so far. And so that's the reason why they've approached people like myself and others to say, help us get ready to how we're going to do this when we start thinking of the risk. So it's no longer just talking to people who are radiation experts and gravity experts. Now they're talking to team experts, to social scientists, to psychosocial about this issue. Here is a quote that we, as part of our interviews, there's a cosmonaut in Russia called Valery Ryumin. And he gave us this quote. He said, all the conditions necessary for murder are met if you shut 2 men in a cabin measuring 18 by 20 and leave them together for 2 months. He's talking about 2 men for 2 months. We're talking about as many as 5 or 6 international, not single culture, international team that's going for 3 years. Okay, this is why Peggy Whitson, who was the chair, she's an astronaut herself, she's actually spent more time in space than almost any other astronaut, male or female. When she was the chair of the for the astronaut selection board, I'm not going to worry about the sound effects here, but essentially what she said is, so far we talked about astronauts who were really rugged, who were really strong, who were brave people and courageous people and engineering people, but today we need to find astronauts who play well with others. That is, are good teammates, get along with others. So the question is, what happens to teamwork when you're under extended periods of isolation and confinement? And we're going to come back and answer the question. The last question we're going to answer is humans AI at work. Humans AI at work obviously has become a big issue. If you look at all the coverage, you will see that people say humans can capitalize on the best of human machine intelligence. Everyone talks about the synergy between human and AI. AI can augment human capabilities and interactions within a team. I bet you every major university in Singapore has an initiative right now on AI, right? Everyone does. I can guarantee you that. Beg your pardon?
So we have the Grab AI lab upstairs.
Absolutely, there you go. Yeah, it's right here. There's no, every university has it. I'm on the Northwestern, it's a little late to the game in my opinion, but I'm on the steering committee at Northwestern University, which our president put together to see what Northwestern should do with data science and AI. Everyone is interested in this. Everyone can see what is the potential for this, right? So you have articles like this that are put out by consulting companies, prestigious places like Deloitte, say, AI success factor, human machine teaming. But then you also have articles like this that are published in the New York Times that could say, how could AI destroy humanity? right? The phrase existential threat has been applied now. If you Google existential threat, all of a sudden AI seems to be the most popular thing that has been labeled as an existential threat. So how do we figure out from a social science point of view, why is it that in some cases human AI teaming work, in other cases it doesn't? In some cases it can actually interfere with and degrade human teams in some ways. Think about what happened with the crash of the 737 MAX. A lot of the post-mortem analysis is that it was a team made up of the AI, or the co-pilot, co-pilot, not the human co-pilot, but the AI co-pilot and the humans. And it was that process loss between them that at one point the AI was not able to cede control back to the human pilots to be able to make whatever changes they needed to do to keep that plane from doing it. So, in fact, one of the things that I wanted to point out to you is a study that was done last year, which I think is fascinating. This is a study about radiologists. And there's a lot, you may have come across the idea behind it. Oh, AI is very good at being able to judge by looking at a radiological image and tell you about a diagnosis better than a doctor. It's amazing, right? You can do vision processing, look at it, and the AI can tell you better than the human whether somebody has a particular affliction or not. This study did something interesting. They looked at the same pictures and gave it to humans. They gave the same picture to AI, and then they gave the same picture to a team of humans and AI. You know who did the worst? The humans plus AI. The humans did better, the AI by itself did better, and when you thought that the humans and AI would do better, they actually did the worst. What's going on here? There's something that we need to learn about how to make it so that human plus AI is not going to be worst compared to either humans or AI. Otherwise, we sort of defeat the purpose. So we're going to ask questions. How does the AI's function providing teamwork or task work contributions affect AI? When I say teamwork or task work, what I mean is when you think about a group that is working together, some of what we do is teamwork. What's an example of teamwork? Teamwork is when I say something like, oh, that's a really good idea. Oh my God, the deadline is coming up. Or we haven't heard from so-and-so. Or we should look at this particular source. That's what we call as teamwork. Task work, on the other hand, is the actual content of the task we're doing. Let's run this particular analysis. What about this particular argument? Can we make this particular argument? Let's collect these data. That's task work. So teamwork is the process of doing the work. Task work is the actual work being done. When you think about the teams we're in, you may not have thought about it so far, but if you think about it, and if you're an organizational psychologist or a person who studies organizational communication or group communication, you may have realized that people who do research and say, in order for a team to be successful, you need to have some people on the team who exhibit leadership and make sure that the team stays good in terms of morale, in terms of motivation, in terms of deadlines, in terms of making sure everyone is excited about it. And then there are some people who are focused much more on the actual work of the task. In fact, in the study of teams, there's a big distinction made between team performance, which is how well a team does, and the concept of team viability. The concept of team viability is how likely is this team going to work together again? How many of you have been on a team so far as part of your class projects or high school projects or college projects, any of the projects? And the team actually did pretty well. But if you ask the people on the team, would you be willing to work with one another again? You go, heck no. That's team performance high, team viability low. In fact, the work that we do with NASA, they keep telling us that team performance is important, but when you send a crew to Mars, team viability is even more important than team performance. Because if these people are going to kill one another, as we saw, then that's not going to be any good, right? So that's why we want to focus on both teamwork and task work. Both of them are very important. Teamwork contributes to team viability, task work contributes to team performance. So what I want to do here is I'm going to tell you that we are in the midst of a perfect storm when it comes to computational social science to address grand societal challenges. And the reason we're in the perfect storm is because we have in the social sciences a lot of theories that we can use, but we also have the ability to advance them. We have methods, both theory-driven methods and data-driven methods, And computational modeling efforts, somebody said they were interested in computational modeling, who was it? You, who? Somebody there said they were interested in agent-based modeling. That's an example of computational modeling. Okay. So those are strategies that are getting more and more important. We also obviously have access to data, much more than we did previously. And then finally, we have the cloud and computational infrastructure to do these things. I'm not going to talk much about the last, but my examples will really focus on the first three: theories, methods, and data when it comes to this. Let me pause. Questions? We're about to get into the meat of it now. Feel free to interrupt me anytime with questions. It's not an interruption, because if you have something on your mind, chances are it's on other people, and they just didn't get around to asking it. So I want you to feel free to stop me anytime and ask questions, okay? And that goes for the backbenchers as well, not just those around you. Okay? Promise? Otherwise, I might fall asleep. I might put myself to sleep. But just got off a flight. So you got to keep me awake, okay? Okay, so here are the questions we thought we couldn't answer. What are the network factors that influence the assembly of innovative teams? Remember that? We started out by talking about the challenge of accelerating innovation. How do we design a dream team builder to optimize the team assembly? Remember I said the so what question is not enough just to understand it, but what are we going to do about it? Second, global health solutions. What are the network factors that determine who influences whom and how in order to scale up? Scale up is the important word, right? Take something that works in a pilot test and scale it up for the entire country or more. Second question, how do we utilize this knowledge to optimize the speed and scope of scale up at minimal cost? So third question, mission to Mars. What are the multi-level factors that influence the emergence of network ties among crews on a long duration space mission? How do these people get to like each other, look to each other for leadership, think that one of them is a hindrance to the other? These are all network ties. And then the second part of that is how do we compose these crews that are optimized for long duration space missions so that we can make sure that we choose the right kinds of combination of people so they have the greatest likelihood of being successful and not killing each other. And then finally, when it comes to human AI work, how does the AI's function in providing teamwork with tasks contribute to their acceptance and team performance? And how can we leverage LLMs and ChatGPT, for example, to make human AI teams more effective? Because right now we know they're not always effective. Remember the study? Humans plus AI do worse at radiology than either humans or AI. Okay, so we thought we couldn't answer this because until now we didn't always have data to do these kinds of things until the last decade. But this was the article I was telling you about, 2009. The simple article, short article that appeared there, started a big discussion about many of the people since then have, many of the folks who are involved with CSS are all co-authors of this article there. And when we wrote this article, we said, we're not trying to get rid of social sciences. Some of you said in the room that you all are multi-method social scientists, right? Right? That you're not single methods. That's a good thing. I'm not here to say that all you do is computational social science. But in this article, we make a specific case that it has to be one of many approaches in the social science, from surveys, interviews, ethnographies, other approaches, case studies, and so on, that we have to build on this. And then more recently, we wrote this article in 2021, and then also one in 2020 in Nature and Science to take stock of where we are and what we're going to be doing. Okay. So let's start with the accelerating innovation question. Remember this picture? David Ferrucci, the guy who was trying to build the team that couldn't build it. Well, I want to tell you some work that we've done that relates to that. So this is work I did with my former PhD student, Marlon, who's now on the faculty at Annenberg USC. Diego, who was on the faculty in computer science and business at Notre Dame. Jackie, who got her PhD also at Northwestern, who's now an assistant professor at Harvard Business School. And my collaborator and the chair of the Comm Studies Department at Northwestern, Leslie DeChurch. Okay, so let me give you one quick study that we did. So we all have been on self-assembled teams, right? All of us have at some point been told, go form teams, and you form the team. Oh, you really think I need that, don't you? Did I start falling asleep? You know what I'd really like? We couldn't get me some water. That would... Is that possible to get me some water? Okay, thank you. Okay, all of you have formed teams at some point, right? Okay, now I'm going to ask you two questions. How many of you have been part of a team that was so super that we would call it a dream team? Right? Can you think of something, a team that was like just out of this world dream team? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 1. That's it. I want to ask you more. How many of you have been on a team that you would consider as a nightmare team that went wrong? There you go. So answer, you've done both, right? That's how you know when you had a dream team. But so many of the others have been on a nightmare team, but never been on a dream team. That's the question we were trying to answer you. This is the dream team. This is the nightmare team that we've all been on, right? So what we decided was we were going to come and check how we could build a computational platform to help us build teams that are more likely to be dream teams. And what can that tell us about the process of building good teams, the secrets of success, but also how could we intervene and make those teams more innovative? You with me? Okay, so let's start with this one. How many of you are familiar with the dating platform? Don't be shy. You all heard of dating. You didn't use it, but you're familiar with it, right? You're all familiar with the dating platform. Dating platforms are great. You put in a profile, and you can then start choosing people, and depending on the platform, you can swipe left and swipe right, and you might find a good mate. If we can do that for dating, why can't we do that for teammating? Right? That's what we're trying to get after. How can we think about building these platforms? So we built a platform. People answer questions about themselves, their profile, but they also answer questions about their networks. Who do they know? Who do they get along with? Who do they want to work with again? Who do they hang out socially with? And then after they've entered it, everyone enters their profile. The system reopens, and then you go start choosing teammates. By the way, this is available if you want to use it. It's been used by a lot of different classes around the world. It's called My Dream. That's this. I hope that's the word, but that's the QR code. And you say, I want a person in my team who's similar to me in personality. I want a person in my team who's a friend of a friend. I don't want to work with a friend directly, but I want to work with a friend of a friend because that person will be new, but I can trust them because they're a friend of a friend. Or I want to work with somebody who's very popular according to other people, even if I haven't worked with that person. You can ask them all kinds of questions. And when you do that, it's going to give you a set of results. And these are the recommendations. And we'll tell you a little bit about that person. I'll tell you what are the criteria that you chose that match that person. And if you want, you can then send an invite to that person. You'll get an email that says, hi, I want you to join my team. And then they can get to respond to that email and say, do I want to join it? The decision is, you can write your answer, and then the decision is either accept, reject, or defer. Defer means you want to wait. Not sure yet. Still thinking about it. Okay? So we wanted to see who invited whom on this platform. How do we choose people? And then, of course, does that make a difference? So we asked the question, what explains it? So we did this in 2 studies, data that was collected as part of an NSF project, the National Science Foundation. And the first was done where the students were in interdisciplinary teams, 2 different departments, social psychology, environment, at 2 different universities, one in the US, one outside the US. And they did this class jointly, and then they were asked to work on a team together to build a marketing campaign to come up with a good environmental sustainability solution. That was the goal of the project. And we gave them this platform and they asked them to see if they want to select teammates. And the first case, they selected teammates, 213 participants formed 32 teams. And the following year, 197 participants formed 31 teams. So remember, we had 2 samples here. So we know we want our dependent variable is who invited who. We know that people want to invite people who have skills. It's kind of obvious. If I need somebody on my team who's good on environmental sustainability, I'm going to choose that person. We know that people in the past have always preferred to invite people of the same gender. It's called homophily, birds of a feather. We also know that there's quite a lot of research that shows that I like to work with the same people again. If I've previously collaborated with someone, I want to collaborate again with them, right? It's the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, right? So we know that is generally true. We wanted to see if a recommendation by the technology shows up on the top, will I be interested in inviting that person, right? It's the equivalent of saying that when you do a Google search and you see the top result, are you going to click on that link and are you going to do what they say? When Netflix or Amazon gives you a recommendation for a particular product or a movie, are you likely to buy it? That's what it was. But the last part is, how likely are you going to be influenced by the technology if you already knew the person versus if you did not know the person. So if the recommendation is about a stranger, am I more likely as compared to the recommendation is about someone I know? You're with me so far? Here's what we found. We found, first of all, that in general, thank you so much. We found that in general, if a person's name showed up in the top 10 recommendation, people were more likely to invite them. Takeaway, we actually believe in technology. We rely on it. We put in our recommendations, and then it said, I think you should invite so-and-so, and lo and behold, we go invite that person. We also confirmed that we do like to invite people who we have previously collaborated. Here is where things got interesting. When it came to the effect of technology versus people who we already know, we found something that was quite interesting. We found a negative interaction effect. What does that really mean? Graphics help that. This one here is the y-axis here is the likelihood of inviting somebody. Okay. The x-axis here, this one here is if a name didn't show up in the top 10, you're not very likely to invite that person. If the name didn't show up in the top 10, right? If the name did show up in the top 10, you're much more likely to invite that person. But the blue link here is really for people whom you did not previously know or you did not collaborate. If, on the other hand, you look at for those you previously collaborated with, if somebody did not show up in the top 10, you're still much more likely to invite that person because you previously collaborated. But if that same person also showed up on the top 10 list, you are slightly more likely to collaborate with that person. Much more likely influenced to collaborate with someone who you did not know, slightly more likely to invite somebody who you had previously collaborated. Does this make sense? Wow, this is an interesting finding, isn't it? Because it tells us the role that technology plays is more influential when it's telling us about something we didn't know. But if we did know someone, like, oh, you know, I like the technology, I believe it, but I also have my own opinions about this. I've worked with this person. So my likelihood of inviting that person is not going to be as high. The same thing was true for the second sample, very robust result. Then we got excited. This was the first one. This was Marlon Twyman's dissertation, who's now an assistant professor at USC Annenberg. Then we began to work with my next generation student, Diego. And Diego comes from Chile. He was very interested in diversity and inclusion. And he says, you know, what if we were to add to this platform on the recommendation list that if someone's name showed up, next to it we said, how much diversity will this person add to your platform? Why did we do that? Because there's loads of research that shows us that if you want to improve creativity in a team, you should have diversity of the team. Now that research is very tricky, so I want to be careful to clarify it. Having a diverse team is a necessary but not sufficient condition for creativity. What does that mean? There's research done by people like Scott Page, who's a professor at Michigan in Ann Arbor. He found that if you take very homogeneous teams where the people are all very similar, and you take very heterogeneous teams where people are very different, and you give them a creativity task, the same creativity task to both, who do you think on average is going to have higher creativity scores, the homogeneous teams or the heterogeneous teams? Heterogeneous teams? Aha! The answer is a trick question. It's a trick question. It turns out that on average, the homogeneous teams and the heterogeneous teams will have the same level of creativity. What? And where is all this diversity story? Well, the diversity story is in the details. It's not in the average, it's in the variation. Okay. These are not whiteboards, right? These are just regular walls, is that correct? Okay, I'm right. So, in some classes now, in some fancy places, they make all of that as part of whiteboards. So here's what I'm getting at. On average, on a scale of 1 to 10, everyone will have 5. Homogeneous teams and heterogeneous. The heterogeneous teams will have a few that are near 9 and 10, and a few that are near 1 and 2. The homogeneous teams will have everyone between 4 and 6 in the middle. You see what I'm saying? So the homogeneous teams will never be very creative. They'll always be in the middle. The heterogeneous teams can be very creative at 9 and 10, but can also be very non-creative because they just crash and burn. They can't talk to each other, they don't have any sense, and they'll crash and burn. Okay, that's the important thing. So diversity is necessary, but not a sufficient control. Thank you. By the end of it, we're gonna have tea, coffee, Coca-Cola, everything, all these things are gonna be done. Everything, they're gonna make sure I don't go to sleep. Okay, so what my student Diego did was he says, let's try different interventions. Let's tell them, adding this person will increase the diversity in your team. Right? And Diego's fervent hope is that if I tell you, adding this person is going to increase the diversity, surely you're going to say, yes, I must invite this person because that person might increase my creativity. That was the hypothesis going in. We call those as informational nudges. We're providing them additional information. Here is some additional nudge information. I think this person is going to increase the diversity. It's a good idea. Maybe you should do it. The other approach we used was called the algorithmic approach. We didn't tell them anything. We simply changed the algorithm so that when they got the recommendations, the person who was going to increase the diversity came at the top. You with me? It's a little sneaky, right? This is what we get upset with Meta and others to do. They mess with the algorithm. So we call it an algorithmic nudge. We still kept the good people there, but we just reordered them so that the person with the highest diversity will show up. You with me? So what did we find? We provided them things like adding X to your team, person X to your team will change the diversity of your team on certain dimensions by plus minus percentage. You see the results we got? People assembled into less diverse teams rather than more diverse teams. It was exactly the opposite. Diego was devastated. He thought he had found a way to get people by giving them information will make them more diverse teams, and he found that they were forming less diverse teams. On the other hand, when it came to algorithmic nudges, people assembled into more diverse teams, and those teams performed better than teams assembled by informational nudges. So why do you think people who were given informational nudges about diversity formed less diverse teams?
The homophily, like people prefer to work with perceived similar.
Exactly. It's because people have such strong homophilic tendencies that even though in principle we think diversity is good, in our own personal private life, when we have to make a choice, maybe not so much. Shh, don't tell anyone else, I just did this on my own. But these are the results we see. So, what we learned here, yes.
So, previous one. So, in the information, next slide. In the informational nudges, there was also some algorithm that was governing the search results, right? So
But that algorithm was purely, it was a good question. That algorithm was, it was a pure response to your query. Remember when we go back to this slide here?
Oh, sorry, I stepped out then, yeah.
No, it's a good question. You see, it said, would you prefer teammates? And we gave them specific criteria, and they could say, very thing, like those you enjoy working with. You want that in one member of the team or in all members of the team, or in 2 members, you could choose how many. And how important is that? You could put it on a scale of positive or negative, disregard it or really consider it. So the algorithm that was used was directly a reflection of the equation that came out of this, right? So it was purely what they were doing. So there was no additional hanky-panky. The only algorithmic nudge was when we got the results from this, we took the diversity and factored it into the reorder. Okay. Okay, so we're done with the first one here. I've been time, half an hour for the rest of me, that's okay. So we said that was the first one. So basically, as we look at the world of algorithms, we can say, is it unethical of us to algorithmically nudge people into it? That's an open question. Does it work? That's no longer an open question. It works. People are buying into these things. We can discuss the ethics of nudging someone like that in algorithm, which we should. So then we talked about how we can influence teams and how we can use team build the optimized team. Because remember what we did here, We changed the algorithms, we got them to come up with better teams that had higher performance. So we answered the so what question of how we can get teams to be more innovative. Global health solutions, we were going to ask the question about network factors, that how to get people to scale up using it. If they don't want to use chlorhexidine as a health worker, if they are in sub-Saharan Africa and they don't want to use modern contraceptives, how do we get them to use it? So what we did was, we based this on an article that Leslie DeChurch and I wrote in PNAS, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And it came from a very, very naive question, almost in retrospect, surprising. There's all these people who do social influence work in the field of social networks. How much am I influenced by people in my network? All of you are familiar with that, right? You look at all people's opinions and attitudes and so on, in political context and health context, and you do social networks models. You can even build complex contagion models like Damon Santola has done at Annenberg at Penn, for example. But there's this whole other field of psychology that also studies social influence, and they never use the word social network. For them, it's about the strategy of the message. What is the message, and how can the message persuade you to do differently? Am I more likely to persuade you if I give you fact? If I were to tell you, this piece of information is known to be fake news. Let's take climate change. I tell you, look, we have evidence that this information that you got on your social media is wrong, is not scientifically sound. Some people will go, oh, okay, I changed my mind. Every one of those, there's somebody else who's going to say, to heck with your facts, I'm entitled to my beliefs. If that was not the case, we wouldn't be in the quandary we are right now, right? There are a lot of people who are not going to believe it. Why? Psychologists will tell you that's because we have two types of people. We have people who have a desire to be right. They want facts. If you give them facts, they'll believe it and they'll work on it. But we have a very large proportion of people in society who are motivated by a desire not to be right, but to be liked. And these are people who want to be with others like them. If their friends like something, they're going to believe it. If they have friends who say this climate change thing is all rubbish, they'll believe it because they want to be friends with everyone else who said that. Right? The desire to be right versus the desire to be liked. So this whole area of social influence literature is huge in psychology. And so what we say in technical terms, they call it the motivation for accuracy, which is fact, versus affiliation, which is being friends with people.
Are they like complementary?
They are complementary, but in some cases, people can be influenced by both. But normally the research shows people tend to be in one camp versus the other, right? And so we have to find out which they are in and how that makes a difference. So we wanted to see to what extent telling somebody you should use modern contraceptives because it is good and we have facts behind it might persuade one person, but in the other case, that's not what's going to work. We need to give them things like, let me give you a free gift, let me do you a favor. Once I do you a favor and you like my favor, you're more likely to agree to my modern contraceptive use because you don't really care about the facts, you just want to have good friends. And you go, oh, I like Noshir, if he told me to do this, I'll do it. That's different from the right. That's affiliation, not accuracy. So we went and did the study that we analyzed, and this is the study that Redmond was involved in our data collection. We did this in Kenya, and we were trying to understand the use of family planning methods. How was it implemented based on behavioral intention? This part of the model is something very well known in psychology called theory of reasoned action, theory of planned behavior. The part that we added to it was this section. How did these attitudes come about in the first place? What role do social networks play in shaping our attitudes about it? So that we can make a prediction of why somebody is more or less likely to adopt modern contraceptive methods. You with me? So we went into the villages. We went to the two villages in Kenya, Mazamoyo, which had a low use of modern contraceptives. We went to a second one that had a slightly higher, 58% were using it. We wanted to see if different villages would have a different effect in this case. We collected data from a lot of people. We did focus groups. We did house-to-house interviews. You recognize this person here? Recognize her? Okay, there she was, collecting data with us in Kenya for this project. We used an app, a mobile app on Android that was developed by colleagues at Christakis. We wrote an article about it. It was such a novel way of collecting data because in the villages, you don't have Wi-Fi access. So So you have to develop an app that is able to be used locally, and then whenever you get a Wi-Fi link, it'll update the database. I don't know if you remember this, but we went to one place in this village where there was a tree, and everyone in the village said, as long as you stand within 1 foot of the tree, you get a Wi-Fi signal. I mean, a mobile signal. If you move away, that's the end of it. You don't get any phone signal for the next 3 miles. That's how it was in those places. We collected these kinds of data. People had the same name, so we had to take the photographs so that we knew exactly which person we were dealing with, and the house, and where they, what the age was, and so on. And these were the kinds of networks we got in the 2 places, where the blue are the males and the red are the females in the 2 villages. We literally went and got data from every single adult in these. It's pretty high response rate, 1,000 plus and 665 instances.
What are we looking at in the last?
This one, we're looking at people, males and females, and who did they go to talk about modern contraceptive methods? So the social network.
Is one gender.
Oh, blue is male,
Okay.
red is female.
So I don't see.
No, it is. Okay, blue is male, red is female. Okay, so what we were trying to do, is that touch screen?
Yeah, it's a touch screen.
Okay. So what we were trying to do is see to what extent people's strategies were playing out in this issue on topics, right? And who was it that was making the difference and how they were. So what we found was that in general, a person, so we use a set of network techniques called autologistic actor attribute models, ALAM for short. And it says what we found was that a person is 0.68 times less likely to use MC on contraceptives if they report talking with someone who believes that it is God who determines how many children a woman has. So notice what we did here. We looked at who was influencing you, but we also looked at what message they were saying. It turns out that we learned that in these places, a lot of people tell other people, well, you shouldn't use modern contraceptives because childbirth is in the hands of God. So we were trying to understand how these messages impact whether people do it or not. A person is 1.45 more likely to use MC if they were talking to someone who believes that knows how to use MC. Because one of the problems is people may not know how to use it. It's called self-efficacy. I have this in front of me, but I don't know how to use it. That's another issue that comes out, especially in places where education levels are not very high. Okay, so again, you see what we did there was we were trying to find ways in which we can use different large-scale data sets to understand how we can address the social challenges, societal challenges. The third one that we're going to focus on is Mars. Remember, we're trying to go to Mars. So here what we did was we wanted to first see what are the factors that explain who gets along with who doesn't get along with whom, that's more important. And then the second is, how can we then use agent-based models or computational models to do essentially a weather forecast, right? When I got here 2 days ago, I checked what the weather was going to be in Singapore, right? I kind of knew what it's going to be, but I wanted to double check that. And that's when I realized that I'm not going to be wearing a jacket the entire year, right? I confirmed it with Renwen, but I decided in general I'm not going to wear it. Why? Because the weather forecast told me what it is. And when I go back, I'll know what the weather forecast is. Can we build a weather forecast that tells us about any team, who's going to get along on a team in 5? Let me ask the question. You are all part of the Summer Institute. Today is day 1. Can I build a model that will tell me who amongst the 2 of you will really get along by the end of the Summer Institute? Can I predict who will not get along at the end of the Summer Institute? Wouldn't that be fun if you can come up with a weather forecasting model that tells you about your relationships? Organizations are very excited about this because when they put teams together and invest a lot of money, they would want to know if the team they've invested in is going to blow up in a few days. Okay? So we're going to focus a little bit about it. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. Okay. So let's look at that one. So this is a study that involved Brennan, who was another one of my PhD students, former PhD students at Northwestern. He's now an assistant professor at Cornell. Alina, who is also one of my former PhD students, now a professor at Northeastern University. Jackie, who I introduced you to. Leslie, who is my collaborator at Northwestern. And Suzanne, who was my collaborator at DePaul University in Chicago, but since then, working with us on this project, got so excited about it that she's now actually at NASA itself. doing some really cool work there in their human behavior and performance group. So what did we find? What happens to teamwork? Remember, this was a question. How does teamwork change? Well, how do you study teamwork under extended periods of isolation and confinement? We're talking about trying to put people into isolation, confine them, they can't go anywhere, they can't talk to anyone for long times, and then try to study them. It'd be nice to have a human petri dish where we could put people into this. Imagine if someone in Singapore said, let's create a lab right next to the Grab lab, create another lab where we put people in there for long periods of time, lock them up. They can't talk to anyone on the outside. Tell them what to do, watch them all the time.
Big boss.
Beg your pardon?
It's like Big Brother.
It's like Big Brother, it's worse. No one is going to allow you to do this. Some of you in psychology may have read about the so-called Stanford prison experiments and so on. Today, no one is going to allow you to do this research. No IRB is going to say, yeah, sure, go ahead, lock them up, make them do this work. But actually, that is exactly what we are doing. Yes, because NASA has its own facilities where they put people, this is one of them. It's called the Human Exploration Research Analog. This is a facility, I was actually there just about a month ago, because we're still collecting data. They put people in there for 45 days at a time. And they select the people, they put them in there, and they observe them like Subhayan said as Big Brother, and we give them surveys, and we tell them to do activities, and they answer all our surveys, and they do all our activities, and we collect all the data from them. 45 days straight. And we've been doing this now for about 7, 8 years. And before we got into the project, NASA had already been doing it for 3 years, 4 years before that. And just in case you think, oh, those Americans, they're crazy, they can't be doing, no other country would do this. Welcome to the Chinese Lunar Palace. They do the same thing in China. They have a similar, they call it the Lunar Palace. But they put people in, and they stay there for a long period of time, and Chinese researchers study what happens to these people when they're isolated like this. And the Chinese and Indians, Chinese in the US are not the only ones, the Russians have this facility. This facility in Moscow, which I've been to many times now, it's called the NEK facility. They put people in there for as much as 500 days. And we actually, during the pandemic, we've collected data there because until the Ukraine war, Russia and the US were very close collaborators in space. And we collected data as part of a joint project between NASA and Roscosmos, which is the Russian space agency. One data set was for 120 days, and the second one was 204 days. And then Ukraine happened. And so they're doing one now there for, I think, 360 days or maybe more than 400 days. But we are not, NASA is no longer a part of that, so I'm not able to get that data. Japanese have their own same chamber, the Europeans have it, private foundations are doing this. Here's the kind of data we collected. This is actual data from the first mission that we collected back, I think it must have been around 2016 or 2016, I think it was 2016, about 8 years ago. We asked the 4 people, who do you work with effectively? And we asked them that question multiple times during the mission. Yes, and lots of questions. This is one example. The green line means this person said, I work effectively with this person. See this? Already. Oh, good. This one? Oh, sorry, I shouldn't touch this. Okay. You also asked them a second question. The second question was, who makes tasks difficult to complete? In networks, we call that the hindrance type. They hinder you. We all know who makes our tasks difficult to complete, don't we? Right? Now, when you look at this data, do you see something interesting? What do you see that's interesting? This person is always difficult to, everyone thought this person is a hindrance. This person didn't think others were a hindrance. This person didn't have a lot of ties going in the other direction. They had 1 year, but everyone else? No, everyone else is fine. No one is a hindrance to me. I'm just a hindrance to everyone else. And reported having really good ties with everyone else here. So here's our challenge. Could our model have predicted that everyone on the team would say this person is a hindrance? It didn't start that way. On the first day, it was only 2 people. And then it became 3 and stayed that way for the entire mission. That's what a weather forecasting model should be able to do, right? Predict who can do this. So we went and built for the literature. There's a lot of work that was the social relations to improve. We know that social relations impact performance. Our goal was to see what impacts the networks. What are the factors that explain why we might look to someone as someone I can work well with, why I might want to look at someone who is seen as a hindrance. This is all coming out of social science theory, right? This is where the theory comes in. People had built these theories, but for normal teams on Earth, not teams that were in isolated, confined environments going to space. So we had to look to see how this works. So we collected all of this data. And then what we did was we built an agent-based model. We used a platform called NetLogo, which very conveniently is developed at Northwestern University. Pretty easy to use. It's not as complicated and it's not as sophisticated, but it's also easy to use. So we built a model based on all the factors that the research had said influences whether I can get along with you well and whether I think you're a hindrance. But unlike most ABMs, most agent-based models will then essentially specify a model and then decide on what parameters they want to use to decide what might happen, because you're using it as what is called as intellectual exercises. What would happen if I did A or B? How will the model change? That's not how we used it. We used it with what is called as not an intellective approach, but an emulative approach. What that meant is we gave it all the data. It's almost like we gave it like a regression. We gave it all the data we had collected at each point in time for the dependent variable, which were the two networks, who gets along with whom and who thinks one is a hindrance. And we gave it all the data for all the predictive variables that we had, because we had collected the survey data. All this data, we collected all this data continuously from it. Remember, some of this is about individuals. Some of it is about the workload they were given. So these were sort of environmental factors, right? How much of workload did they have? Were you asking them to do difficult tasks? Was it that they were put into sleep deprivation? I gotta tell you, when they put it to that, there's a point in time in the middle of the mission where they have loud sounds that make sure they can't sleep, because that could happen in real space travel. We also have communication delay, because if they're going on a mission to Mars, then after about 10 days or 20 days into the mission, the communication with mission control has to have a time lag, because they're trying to simulate what would happen in real space situations. So we got all this data, we put it into the model, and then we built a simulation. So remember, the simulation here was estimating parameters based on actual data, which is a very different approach from most of what is done in agent-based models, where you put parameters that you think are reasonable and you change the parameters to see to do what-if scenarios. Here we were estimating parameters using the model itself. So what we did was we would build tools that look like this. So this was an actual video from the data that we did. And you begin to see what our model is simulating would be the type of relationship that a person would have in others. Now, in order to do this, we then got parameters for each of those variables, right? This is like a regression coefficient, you can think of it. There are lots of variables here. The two dependent variables is task affect, that is, who do you enjoy working with, and hindrance, who you did not enjoy working with. You with me on that so far? So let's take an example. Self-monitoring is positively associated with task affect, negatively associated with hindrance. What does that mean? Self-monitoring is a very popular psychological variable. It says, to what extent am I capable of monitoring what other people think of me? Self-monitoring, that's a psychological construct, very well known psychological self-monitoring. People who are good at self-monitoring can read a room and say, yeah, everyone is getting totally bored. They're waiting for the break. It's time for you to stop talking shit, right? That's a high self-monitor. A low self-monitor has no idea what people are thinking about. The fact that you have a negative coefficient for hindrance means that that person who was at the bottom was really bad at self-monitoring. Low self-monitoring meant they were much more likely to be seen as a hindrance. You see that? It's a negative coefficient. On the other hand, high self-monitoring means people enjoy working with you, right? I'm just giving you one as an example. There's lots of variables here. Workload. When the workload was really, really high, guess what? People didn't enjoy working with one another. Makes sense, right? If everyone is stressed out, you're not, I mean, you've finished your exams, you're done with the term. At Northwestern, we still have the core deadline. I meet my students, they're totally stressed out because the finals are all due next week. Okay, if I ask them, how are you enjoying working with your teammates? They're gonna say, oh no, I hate it, right? Because of cumulative workload is so high. We built a lot of these different models, and then we began to do training and testing of them. And so what you can see here is training accuracy, which is not a good measure necessarily, was very high, but the F1 score was also very high when it came to performance on precision and recall, and the F1 were all high for both enjoy working. What is this telling us? This is a very scary finding, actually, if you ask. It says I can build a model that will tell you how good you're gonna, who you're gonna enjoy working with and how much. Makes me feel very good as a computational social scientist. It makes me feel very scared as a human being that we can build these models with such high levels of precision in this case. Difficult to complete, but not as good. These score numbers are not as good. Why? Partly because the data set is not balanced. The good news for these people who are working at NASA, they got along well with one another. That's great. They didn't have a lot of hindrances. We saw one exception, but they didn't have any hindrances. That's good for the crew. That's terrible for me as a data analyst because I didn't have enough data on people who were hindrances. I need more data on people who are hindrances if I want to build a better model. Okay. So essentially we took that, we validated the data, and then we thought we were done. I went to the NASA investigators workshop. Everyone is funded by NASA. We go to the workshop and we would present our results. And we showed them that after doing this for many missions, we got really good at this. We did cross-validation, cross-fold validation. I was ready to uncork the champagne to tell the people, and the NASA people were super impressed. Oh my God, we can't believe that you can actually do this. Remember, most of them are not social scientists. Most of them are physiology and physics and things of that kind. And for them to see a social scientist come and tell them that I built you a computational model that is able to do this level of prediction, they were like, wow, that's pretty cool. You're like one of us. But that lasted for all of 5 minutes. And then the head of that particular group came to me and says, you know, this is great. But at the end of it, what good is it if you tell me that A and B, astronauts A and B are not going to get along 45 days from now, when they're already on their way to space? I want this group, you're telling me this group is better than some other groups, but at the end of the day, I want a group where it's not enough for you to tell me that it's going to snow on this day if you're in Chicago, or if it's going to be above 100 degrees in New Delhi. I want you to fix it. I'm like, wait, so you don't want a weather forecast model after all. You want me not only to predict the weather, but you want me to change the weather. And he goes, that's exactly what I want you to do. And so we began another set of studies where we said, how do we intervene? So how can we use a network model to intervene in teams? Can we change something? There's only some things we could do. What we were allowed to do was we could not change the people, but we could move the schedule a little bit. Who was going to work with it? And so I'm going to take the two of you as an example. Let's say, fine, but the two of you on day 45 not going to get along. Okay? What am I going to do? I'm going to say, maybe what I need to do is not have you work on anything together so that you don't have a problem. Or I can say, I want the two of you to work with her because she's really good friends with the two of you and maybe she'll help fix the problem the two of you have. Or I can have the two of you work on something that you're both really good at. Because if you're both really good at it, you'll be successful, and success builds bonds between you. I have these strategies, that's all I could do. So we tried to create a model where we were going to pair people based on who we thought was not going to work well and decide how to handle it. And we would then do a test. We did an A/B test where we had a model set. The two of them are not going to get along. Let's see what we can do to pair them differently or otherwise in order to repair the relationship. Get it? Pairing people to repair their relationship. That was my contribution to this project. Pairing for repair. So this is what we did. And I don't have much time, but what I will tell you is that, first of all, we wanted to see, did they actually, on that particular day, is it true that they didn't get along or they were not getting along? And we saw that our models were actually pretty good at predicting. And then could we repairing the repair teams, could we repair the repair teams by repairing them? And the answer again was yes. So now we have a grant where we are in final stages. In fact, that's why I was out in Houston this now, where we built a dashboard. We call it Team Star, standing for Tool for Evaluating and Mitigating Space Team Risk. One of the things you learn as a researcher is that coming up with good acronyms is half the story. It's very important to get grants. So this was my acronym, Team Star, Tool for Evaluating and Mitigating Space Team Risk. Okay.
You're in the right country for that, for acronym.
Acronyms, yeah, we saw what ICA already. But if you go here, we click on it and it allows you, but right now we have the team using this dashboard with the agent-based model behind it. And it gives them an opportunity to learn whether they want to do teamwork or task work and how they want to build certain things and who they want to work on it. We're giving them autonomy in deciding how they want to handle the situation. So we're in the process of doing that right now. So the last one we want to focus on is the changing nature of work, the UI, the AI team, and I have 7 minutes. So here we were interested, so this is a project that is funded by the Army Research Lab, but also by Microsoft Research. And so here what we're looking at is, can we look at the structural signatures of human performance teams? So there's a whole bunch of people who've been involved in this, and our current students, but it's a very new project. Seva, who is one of my PhD students, who is working on this quite a bit right now, and we saw the synergy thing, etc. So we said we already saw the radiation story, right? The radiologist, the human AI team did worse than the humans for the AI. So what we did was we wanted to see how we could nudge people into doing less in this particular context. We asked the question, how does the AI function in providing teamwork or task work contribute to the acceptance? Remember, teamwork is the process work, you know? Are we meeting a deadline? Do we have good morale? Is everyone talking equally? Everyone contributing? It's team viability. Task work is your actual performance tasks. So we conducted a study where we created a fake AI. This was before ChatGPT. This is during the pandemic. We created a fake AI. We called it Vero, V-E-R-O. We did all kinds of very good fancy shenanigans to make them believe. By the way, this particular approach is well known in AI studies. It's called the Wizard of Oz approach, right? The Wizard of Oz means, you've seen the movie, you have someone behind the scene, but they think it is actually an AI agent. I can just tell you right now that we had this, we give a really fancy slide that shows. Yeah, that's Vero. So we made Vero into like an abstract animation that would move around and talk and wave and stuff like that. And then there were humans. And there was a person behind it, but they didn't know that, right? Yeah, there was a person behind it, but they didn't know that, right? And so what we did was we conducted this, and after the study, we asked them, how confident were you that that was an actual AI agent? 95+% of the time they said they thought it was an AI agent. And when we debriefed them, because it's deception, right? So I had to debrief them after every experiment. And they were shocked. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know it was an actual human. I spoke so rudely to it. Some of them told us I flirted with it. Some of them would say things like, I want to go on a date with you. So they had all kinds of different reactions, but they really believed it. And that's obviously important to what we want. So we gave them different kinds of tasks. They had to solve a problem that had a correct answer. They also had a creative problem where we asked them to just say, what are the ways in which you use a paperclip, which is one of the classic studies in psychology. And so task work again represents what it is that the teams are doing, whereas teamwork is how they are doing it with each other. So that's the process part of it, right? And so the problem solving is they were asked, what are the things that your team will want to keep with them the way they're stranded on the moon? So we give them like 40 things and they have to choose the top 10 things, and there is a correct answer for this. And this is creative tasks like things like a paper clip or a break. What other use you have for it? This was the human AI teams. And what we found was that the simulated AI, if the AI agent only gave them task work contribution, they liked it. If the AI agent gave them teamwork contribution, they did not like it. They don't want the AI to tell you, oh, please talk some more, or what's going on with you, or we have a deadline. Stop it. That's not what AI does. They think of AI as someone who will provide content, task work contribution. Because they still are somewhat like a Siri or an Alexa thing about it. I will say that some of them talk to the AI as though it was an AI. Some of them pretended like AI was a Siri. They'll talk to each other and say, do you think we should ask Siri that question? Imagine in a real human team, if I were to be in a group of people and I come to you and I say, should we ask Renwen this question when Renwen is sitting in the room? That's one of the things we've learned about the dynamics of human AI teams that are quite interesting. So in contrast to perceptions of human teammates, where teamwork contributions are equally valued and augment the value of task work, human teams expect AI to contribute to task work, not to team. And then we did a separate study where we made the AIs be like a jerk. They're smart. Remember the competent jerk that we talked about with David Ferrucci's IBM Watson, the guy who's really good but is a jerk. We have that. There's a whole body of rich literature in social networks about competent jerks and lovable fools. There's an article in Harvard Business Review about that topic. So we manipulated the AI to be competent but be a jerk, versus being competent and being so high competence, low competence, likability, low likability, high likability. And when it comes to humans, most humans will say, I don't want to work with a competent jerk, which is the whole premise of why it's a problem, right? Because organizations are often losing because somebody will say, yeah, I think so-and-so is competent, but I don't want to work with that person because that person is a competent jerk. It turns out humans don't feel the same about AI. They are perfectly happy working with a competent jerk who's an AI. So while it comes to human beings, they would say no. When it comes to AI agents, they go, check, yes. I don't care if the AI is a jerk, I'd still work with it. Okay? When it comes to AI, they don't want to work with incompetent, even if it's nice. But when it comes to humans, they would have that problem. So there's just so many. So now we have ChatGPT-2 that we're looking at as a way of doing this. These are studies that are currently underway, which we've just started actually, on a new $1 million grant that we have from the Army Research Lab to continue this work and replace the Wizard of Oz with a real AI agent in this case. Okay, so to wrap up here, I've taken you on a quick tour of 4 different types of societal challenges, how teams can be tweaked for innovation, how we can use networks to scale up global health solutions, how we can use computational modeling to help both forecast teams and then fix the team's problems. And then finally, what are we able to do in terms of understanding why is it that sometimes human and AI can be better than both humans and AI, even though there is research that shows that sometimes they're not better. Back to the slide that we looked at. All of this is illustrations in whatever areas you're working on where you need to think about how do you take advantage of existing theories in this area. Don't pretend like computational social science starts with a clean slate. There's a lot of work that's done that we need to do. I'm not even joking about it, because a lot of our people in computer science will do that, not because they are mean, not because they don't think that social science is not worthwhile, they just don't know about it. And so when they say, oh, I think this is an interesting problem, and they go at it, they're doing it out of good meaning, they're smart people, they're creative people, but they're just not familiar with it. That's where folks in computational social science can really make a difference. Bring along what we know from the social sciences. Look at all these great methods we're talking about. You're going to learn a lot more of the methods than what we've talked about here. There's a really good article that I would recommend that you take a look at that was published by the person who started the Summer Institute. You know who was one of the first people who started the Summer Institute? Chris Bale and Matt Salgani. 2 important names we should remember. We owe it to them that the Summer Institute started. Chris Bale had an article in PNAS that came out 2 weeks ago. Have you seen that article? It's in my bag actually there. It's an article about how computational social science can use Gen AI to help with research. I will highly recommend. It's an open access article. You can Google it. You can look at it right now. I will encourage you to take a look at that article. Chris came and gave a talk at Northwestern. I had dinner with him the week before this article actually came out. Sends his regards to you, by the way. I told him I was going to be here visiting Singapore. That article is a really interesting article because it focuses on ways in which social science research can benefit from Gen AI, right? So it's not about Gen AI in society, it's about how Gen AI can actually help the enterprise of doing social science research. And obviously that includes computational social science. For example, I'll give you a trivial example. One of the things that we are doing this time, last time when we had Vero, the the fake AI. We got data from people about what they thought the AI agent was doing, but couldn't really get data from the fake AI agent because it was not a real AI agent, right? And that makes for interesting network questions, because if you want to do a network analysis, you need to get network data from all the nodes in the network, which would include the AI agent. This time, we are still asking each person on the team, who do you get along with, including the AI agent, who do you think is a hindrance, the normal network questions we did. This time, we're getting Vero to answer the survey questions just like we're asking the humans. Have you thought about that? Because if you have a human AI team, the AI has contributed to the team. At the end of it, just like the human said, I'm going to give you a survey to tell you what you think of the other members of the team, we now give Vero and say, Vero, tell us what you think of the other members of the team who happen to be humans. So we are using Vero and ChatGPT to get the Vero to answer survey questions about how well they thought they got along with the other people in the team. And we have instances where the Vero will say, that person was a real hindrance in the team. Just like we got in the real human state. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop. So computational social science can help address societal challenges, and societal challenges can advance what we're doing with computational social science. The last example I gave you in the PNAS article is how we are able to then see how we can come up with new ways of building social science, computational social science method, based on the questions we get. Thank you so much. 3 minutes over time, so sorry.
Like 7-minute Q&A. I'm sure all of you have a lot of ideas and thoughts or questions you want to share. The food is ready outside, but I do want to, have a.
I'm by the way, I'm going to be, I know some of you may be hungry and stuff like that. I don't want to force you to, I don't want to be in, I will be around at least till what, 2 o'clock this afternoon? So there'll be plenty of time. I'm happy to take questions now for sure. But if some of you are looking there like, I want to go get something to eat and drink, I don't want to force you to stay here. So we'll do whatever you want to do. I'm not going anywhere.
5 minutes of 5 seconds.
Let's take some questions. Sure. I'll give the microphone to whoever has a question. Oh, you already have a microphone. Oh, you're the, okay. We have 2 microphones and no one wanting to talk. There we go.
In your first study, you mentioned that we looked at diversity in the team. I'm just curious how diversity was measured or conceptualized, because in the literature there are.
Sure. Yeah. So very good question. 2 aspects to that. How was diversity measured in terms of form clue, and how diversity was measured in terms of what dimensions of diversity. Okay, so one actually maps onto the other. So if you look at a dimension, there are several dimensions on which you can be diverse, right? One is expertise diversity. You're the expert when it comes to computational social science. Another person may be the expert on literature reviews. So one way, so when you have different categorical variables like, yes or no, or even on a continuous scale, but it's categorical different areas of expertise, then there are certain measures of diversity. What is it? Blau, the Blau index is a measure that can be used to look at how you're looking at diversity across different dimensions. But you can also look at diversity on a single scale, right? Where you're looking at where you're looking at the extent to which, for example, age diversity. Everyone has an age. Some may be younger, some may be older. So there you're not looking at a different dimension, you're looking at diversity along a single dimension versus diversity across multiple dimensions. So when you're looking at diversity across a single dimension, then what you would do is you would use the Gini index. You're familiar with the Gini index. So that is an index that is used, for example, for economic concentration, right? What percentage of the wealth is amongst what percentage of the people, right? The so-called 80-20 rule. 80% of the wealth is with 20% of the people, for example. It's actually much worse than that, but you get that idea. So you choose what dimensions are there. In our study, we used a composite of diversity on expertise, as well as diversity on what we call hidden factors. So some of the diversity would be things like gender. You can see gender, that's a visible factor. Ethnicity, generally a visible factor. Personality, not so much. So we used separate measures to look at diversity, both for overt factors where I can see it in someone, versus what we call hidden factors where you cannot see it unless you know the person. So our measure of diversity, there was the one I presented was a composite measure, but we did this across each of the areas to see, is it only true for expertise or is it only true for social variables? Is it only true for hidden variable versus visible variables? And in general, we found that the finding was robust across each of these different categories, which means we treat diversity broadly in a similar fashion, which goes back to the point that you were making earlier, and that is we have a tendency to believe that even though we hold in our mind the thought that diversity can be desirable, that when it comes to our own personal preferences that are made in private, we can tend to be marvels. Does that answer your question? Yes. Very nice.
Oh, okay. I'm just a very basic one question. Thanks for your sharing. I'm interested in the second part about global health solutions. I'm curious about to what extent we can identify research question as global. Is that original? How do you define global health solutions instead of regional health solutions?
Okay. So thank you for those kind words about it. So when I said that those were global health challenges, I didn't mean that they were global health solutions. Okay. The problem is the word global health was used primarily because the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or for that matter, if you look at the United Nations have set a sustainability program of what they see as the big challenges that we face in society, climate change and one of them. The word global refers to something that affects large parts of the globe. That doesn't mean that a global challenge needs to have a global solution, right? In the area of climate change, for example, not what I presented, but I'll give you a very specific example that we can relate to in South Asia and Southeast Asia. We all understand the problems that are created in terms of environmental pollution, right? And we all want to do better when it comes to deal with carbon emissions in this context. The solutions may vary depending on where you are. The United States has learned the hard way. I was at the COP meeting, so this is the main meeting for climate change people. The last COP meeting was held in Dubai in December 11th, 12th. I was there for that meeting to talk about how to use networks to help people deal with this issue. One of the things that's very clear is that countries like China, countries like India, developing countries, emerging economies will say, look, you want us to shut down all our use of coal emission before we develop to the status where we would be like you in the United States and in Germany, where you use all the coal, created the problem you're in, and now that you are at that advanced stage, you are saying you won't use coal, but you will prevent us from using coal, so then how would we get developed without it? So the solutions of how you ask different people to address a global solution, a global challenge, is local. The solutions that are going to work in China or in India are by definition likely to be very different from the solutions today that will be used in the West, for example. So I'm glad you asked me to clarify. I didn't imply that there's a global solution. The challenge is global. The solutions could very well be local.
Yeah.
Yes.
My question, thank you for your wonderful keynote, and the question is about, you mentioned that the efficiency of the teamwork between the human and AI is the lowest compared with AI and AI or human with human. And my question is that, first, how could we define the efficiency here? And the second is that, should we consider the baseline here? For example, we already co-work with human for many years, but as a human, we also need to learn how to co-work with AI. So, I mean, the baseline here is not the same. So, should we take this baseline question into consideration when we talking about efficiency?
Yeah, very, very good question. So, first of all, the study, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. The one study that I showed you where human and AI were worse than human or AI is true, but it's not the only study. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that it is established fact that human plus AI is always inferior to either human or AI. There are instances where human plus AI fail compared to human and AI. There are certainly many instances where human plus AI is better than human or better than AI, or at least one, if not the other. Okay, so that I want to establish. So that said, the question you asked is, well, but humans have been working with humans forever. Human and AI just started working. So is it fair to complain about humans and AI when they just, isn't that your question? Yeah, it's an absolutely legitimate question. And this is part of the reason why in today's world, a lot of the academics and a lot of policymakers are investing money in developing skills for humans to work well with them, right? I don't know if many of you are familiar with the work of Professor Esther Hargitay. Does that name ring? Are you familiar with Professor Esther Hargitay? No one, you should be. As you know Esther Hargitay. Digital inequality, exactly, thank you. So Esther Hargitay is a sociologist by training. She got a PhD at Princeton. She spent a lot of time at Northwestern. She's now at the University of Zurich. And in my opinion, she is one of the best researchers who has spent her entire life addressing the question that you just brought up. And it is about digital skills and digital inequality. Back in the 1990s, when the internet was just getting much more popular and people were beginning to think about what could be done with the web, people were saying, oh, there's a digital divide. And the digital divide at the time was defined by politicians and administrators in different countries as who had computers and who didn't have computers. It was an objective hardware difference. If you have a computer, you don't have a computer. If you have a computer, you're a have. If you don't have a computer, you're a have not. There's a gap. And we see that people who have access to computers do better. Great. And it is also true that when you give people computers, everyone gets better. But those who were digitally skilled get much better than those who were not digitally skilled. So Esther has done all these fantastic studies where she would give people a certain problem to solve on the internet. Go find the best used car you can for no more than $1,000. And she gave the same task to different people. And in this case, she gave everyone a computer. But what she found was that the people who came with higher socioeconomic status and skills were very quickly able to find the car, a good car, and others were fumbling with it. So just giving someone a computer is not going to solve it. The next stage was internet access. Oh, it's not just a computer, you need to have access, broadband access. That became the next issue. Again, she found that just giving broadband access in and of itself is not important. It's the skills that we. Now she's focusing on algorithmic skills. Why is it that some of us know how to understand the Netflix algorithm or the Amazon algorithm, or even a Google search algorithm? What is it that you type into Google search? It turns out some of us are more skilled about what we put into Google search engine to get better search results than other friends of ours who don't know what to put into Google. And today, it's exactly the same thing with Gen AI prompts. So whether you're using ChatGPT or you're using Gemini or you're using any of the other products that are out there, it turns out some people are much better at what is fancily called prompt engineering. What are the actual words you put in there? And what are the skills we have? There's a really interesting book that has been published within the last couple of months called Co-Intelligence, right? And so Co-Intelligence is written by a professor at Annenberg, at Ethan Mollick, who is a professor at, not Annenberg, at Wharton at University of Pennsylvania. And Ethan has found that if you go to ChatGPT and you tell ChatGPT certain kinds of prompts, you're going to get much better responses than if you put no. One that I find hard to believe, but he's found this and he's reported it in his book and he's reported on podcasts is, if you tell ChatGPT, I'm going to ask you, first of all, if you tell ChatGPT, I want you to be an expert on network science or on computational social science, and then say, I want you to analyze this matrix and tell me what the centrality scores are, etc. If you start by saying, I want you to be an expert on network science and then give it some results, it's more likely to give you an accurate answer than if you didn't start by saying, I want you to be a network scientist. Some people know that skill, others don't. Ethan found that if you tell ChatGPT, I'm going to ask you a question and my life depends on it, it'll provide a more accurate answer than if you tell Ethan, if you tell ChatGPT, just answer this question. So I don't know why that works, but apparently Ethan found it works. He also found that it gave more accurate answers towards the end of the class semester than in the middle of the summer. And he thinks it has to do with the fact that ChatGPT knows it's answering questions for students at the end of the, towards the end of the term, when they need good answers and not so much in the middle of the summer. I don't believe that necessarily, but that's in that book too. But it's a great book. The point I want to make out here is that skills make a difference. And so to answer your question, we are interested in looking at how these kinds of factors will help us make human AI teams skilled like we are with human humans. And the last point I'll make on that point is it's not enough to look at human AI skills. One of the projects, one of the findings which I didn't talk about today, is that this is in collaboration with Martha Young, who's a professor at Cornell in the Department of Information Science there. He found, and we've corroborated this in our work, is that having an AI on the team not only changes the dynamic between the human and the AI, it changes the dynamics between the humans and the humans on the team in the presence of the AI. There's a fantastic video on YouTube that Martha has put, where a robot is on the team with two humans, and one human begins to feel jealous that the robot is favoring the other human. And so the two humans start fighting with each other because they are jealous of the fact that one is favored by the AI versus the other. So there is also not just human AI dynamics, but human dynamics in the presence of an AI that we need to study better in this time.